We're waiting for one more board member, but we can start with that. So if you could please join us with a pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I'm going to call to order the 21st of September meeting of the Village of Sag Harbor Zoning Board of Appeals. We get a motion to approve the minutes of the August 17th meeting. So, second. All in favor? Aye. So as a courtesy to anyone in the audience, we have 4 applications which are being adjourned until further notice. 24 Ryston Street, 34 High Street, 70 Glover Street, and 29 Harding Terrace, and 23 Suffolk Street. So these will be adjourned as they're encountered according to the agenda. Item number 1 this evening is a correspondence requiring action. So this is for Vax Enterprises, 31 Long Avenue.
Good evening, Dennis Downs, attorney for the applicant. I submitted a petition which is fairly extensive as far as why this applicant should be granted a moratorium exemption. They have been before these boards on 18 occasions since 2008. The application has been modified several times to satisfy different requests by several of the different boards. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. I don't think it doesn't make sense for me to read this petition. You all have it. Dave, you have that?
Oh, thank you. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak on this application, please? Firstly, I'd like to make a motion to open the public hearing on this application. Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Chairman, just incorporate Mr. Downs' comments that preceded the opening.
For the record, Mr. Downs' comments precede the motion to open this application. Proceed, please.
Good evening. Tiffany Sparlato, 45 Division Street, Sag Harbor, for 11 Bridge Street LLC and a number of the surrounding properties. This isn't easy to do. Obviously, I know Mr. and Mrs. Scavone quite well, but I really wanted to speak with the board on behalf of the applicant and on behalf of my client and on behalf of myself as well about process and about the zoning process in the village. No matter where I've sat, whether I've been the applicant myself, I've been representing applicants, I've done opposition work, I've sat on the zoning board, and I've sat on the board of trustees. In all of those positions, I think the greatest part of zoning is the process that we have to go through in order to get to the end. At this point, we're in the middle of a moratorium. It's a difficult time in Sag Harbor. We all know that a lot of properties have changed hands and we aren't quite sure what these properties are going to look like in a few years. And we're certain to undergo an amount of change that we all have to be patient with and shake out how we really want our village to look and feel. This is the village's opportunity to look what's happening and zone appropriately for it. And we want everyone to be on the same page and operating from the same code book. We don't have any opposition to a building on the site, understanding that variances would be necessary with the appropriate uses. What we don't want is a building with a large use and a building that was designed by a corporation for a corporate store use. That is exactly what the 2008 moratorium comprehensive plan update and rezoning was about. And ensuring those safeguards stay in place is paramount. With regard to the notice for the exemption for the moratorium, application states that it's a single-story building, which is not true based on council's testimony at the last meeting. There is in fact a second floor on the building, which the chairman pointed out at the last hearing. On the variances themselves, which has been slated for possible rental space on the second story to 7-Eleven, as well as another tenant for which they've been negotiating a lease, and that would be namely the Shabbat. It's my understanding from Mr. Downs' testimony at the last hearing that there's a 25-year lease already in place that would be triggered upon approvals for this project. And I do submit to the board that now that we know what the use is going to be for that property, that a use variance also needs to be submitted for the application. Currently, the village code in the office district prohibits a convenience store use. The proposed code that's currently under consideration by the village, which is the subject of public hearings right at this very moment, also prohibits a convenience store in that location. I understand that applicant is reliant completely upon a letter issued by the village attorney at the time, and I would submit to that board that the village should look very closely as to whether or not that individual had the authority to issue that letter and what the ramifications of that letter actually are. I would submit to the board that Village Law 7712 gives the building inspector the authority to interpret the code and not some other individual in the village. And it's our position that the attorney lacked the authority to issue such a letter with such far-reaching consequences and results in a complete circumvention of the zoning code and its processes as articulated under New York State village law, the village code, and relevant case law. It is a somewhat unusual circumstance, and I understand that, but there is relevant case law on point that requires the uses in the new building to be conforming to zoning. As I said, there is no other data that has been submitted either to the village or that the village board is currently considering that would leave us in any other position but to conclude that the moratorium exemption would in fact impede the process that's ongoing right now in front of the village board of trustees and would impede any particular study that they're doing. This is a lot that is centrally located within the study area. And it is a lot that should this building and use be permitted to go on that lot would really overturn everything that the village board is trying to do right now or substantially put a sort of kink into their plans, whatever those plans might be. We might see further changes from the village board of trustees, but at this point, we don't know what those are. And right now, as I said, the use is prohibited under existing code and the proposed code that the village is considering. The exemption petition states that the applicant has been deprived of the property since 2008 and has been in the process for a number of years. To that, I would say a couple of things. I wouldn't think for 1 second, nor would I want anyone else to think that National Grid or Keyspan did not compensate the applicant properly for that property and the use of that property, the loss of income from that property, as well as income that would potentially be utilized for the reconstruction that they knew that eventually would happen. So that comment isn't necessarily completely true. Every property owner within the moratorium study has been equally affected by the delays. And we would just ask again that everyone be able to work from the same code book, and that while we're developing a comprehensive plan for the village, that it's one in which everyone is able to participate and has an equal say, and we're not just randomly issuing moratorium exemptions for buildings that are exactly the thing that we tried to fight against back in 2008 and 2009. There will be an inevitable adverse impact to the neighborhood as the application is not in compliance with the 2008-2009 comprehensive plan. I do have a copy of that with me. I'll hand that up to the board because there are specific sections of that which are relevant. And they are the recommendations 3, 4, and 5 that are contained in the planning strategies document that I'm handing up. I don't drop all the rest of it. I just ask that the zoning board take a look at the village's comprehensive plan as it currently exists for that property. As a matter of fact, the issue of convenience store in that particular use is addressed on, I think, page 72 of the document that I handed you. And at this point, again, as I said, we would just ask the board to reconsider the issuance of a moratorium exemption on this property for those reasons.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the board. Alex Friedman, 279 Main Street. I'm here on behalf of Sag Harbor Development Holdings and JAB 2 West Water Street. This is an application for an exemption from the moratorium. And I would encourage you, I would respectfully encourage council to look closely at the plain language of the moratorium. Because if you do, you will see that you have no choice but to deny this application. Section 1 of the moratorium sets forth specific findings and objectives. It says that the village is undertaking its first major update of its comprehensive plan since 2004, and that it has commissioned Nelson, Pope, and Voorhees to do a study. The village says in these findings and objectives that it wants a study to guide future growth while protecting the character of the village and remaining public water vistas. It notes in the findings and objectives that there are several privately owned properties that are ripe for redevelopment. And it says that the whole point of the moratorium is to prevent these properties from being approved for development before the study is completed. Both the planning board and this board are on record of having expressed concern that the current regulations in this village are not working sufficiently to protect village charm and character. That's right here in the findings and objectives. And it says in the findings and objectives that without the study, development could result in a patchwork of new buildings by property owners seeking to achieve maximum build out. It says without the moratorium, the study will be moot, meaning the moratorium is in place, so you wait until the study is done to guide development of these privately owned properties. This is exactly what it's seeking to do. Now, there's an application here for an exemption. The exemption is set forth in section 4 of the moratorium. And it has substantive requirements. Section 4B, no exemption shall be granted hereunder unless the zoning board shall specifically find and determine and shall set forth in its resolution granting such exemption. And it sets forth 3 bullet points. So you would have to make these findings. Now, one of which is undue hardship to the petitioner. And I read Mr. Downs' petition, and he's a good lawyer, and I don't think anyone can question that these folks have been through a lot of hardship. But number 2 says, no exemption shall be granted unless the zoning board shall specifically find and determine that the grant of the exemption will clearly have no adverse effect upon any of the village's goals or objectives in undertaking its update of the comprehensive plan or the local law. Talk about throwing out the baby with the bathwater. The whole point of the moratorium is to not develop these properties until you have the study. And now there's a request to exempt one of these properties from the moratorium. You might as well just tear the whole thing up. A couple of other things I just want to note. There's a notice requirement and there's a public hearing requirement. It doesn't say, I read it, doesn't say anything about the 7-Eleven, but that is part of the plans. It's been said in a public hearing that there's plans for a 7-Eleven store and a lease and a development. So how could you possibly consider that? How could the public possibly know that this is what's on? So I would submit to you that the notice is improper. I would also submit to you, I see this is on the agenda for this board. It's item number 6. I don't know how that's possible because the law says there has to be a resolution first with those specific findings. So I think there's some procedural problems here, but the bigger problem is this is a request to throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is exactly what the moratorium is intended to prevent: development of these properties until the study is done. I respectfully submit that you have no choice but to deny the application, wait for the study and the moratorium to be completed, and then this application, item number 6, can be considered on the merits along with everything else, and it can be considered in light of the study and whatever changes that this board requested that may be made to the code. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kriegstein. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on this? Mr. Downs, would you like to comment?
Yes, please. First, let me preface my remarks by the fact that the last 2 speakers both represent competitors of the tenant that's proposed in this building. So you have to take some of their words with a grain of salt. Mr. Thiel's letter was nothing more than a repeat of what was in the code at the time. If you lose your building for some reason, usually it's a fire or a flood or something of that nature, you can rebuild your building. You can rebuild your use. You're not denied your use, right? And that's consistent with every zoning code that's been written in this village since 1971. And I've studied every one of them. No use variance is necessary. Mr. Thiel made that very clear. 2 building inspectors have reviewed these plans. Both of them have indicated no use variance has been required. If there was a use variance requirement, we would have been discussing it last month, not based on someone raising it at the last minute tonight. The delays that the Sagamonis have experienced occurred long before the moratorium. We're talking about a year and a half ago, there was a moratorium. They have been at this process since 2008, way before the moratorium. If you study what's going on in the village right now, usually it's through the newspaper, you'll find out there are no goals and wishful thinking as to what the village wants to do. They haven't stated what the goal is. They just simply adopted a moratorium so that there be no more construction in a certain area in the village. But that's all subject to the Scavonis' right to rebuild their building based upon what the code was when they lost their building. And were they compensated by National Grid for when the building was torn down? Absolutely. Have they been compensated rent-wise since then? No, not at all. National Grid is completely out of it. They finished their remediation and that was it. It ended. And Scavonis have been sitting there paying taxes on this property ever since with no compensation to them for the lack of use of their property. And this moratorium is going to result in a code. And the code is going to affect a certain section of this village. It's not a comprehensive plan. Where is the discussion that's going to go on with respect to the residential area? They did the same thing that's been done since the 80s. They attack a certain area and they say, we're gonna revise the code for this particular area, and they create these zones, and then they change them a few years later. And then a few years after that, they start adding other provisions to it. There hasn't been a comprehensive plan in this village since 1971. And the only reason they did that is because they lost the 1949 code. They couldn't prove that they adopted it properly. It got thrown out. And in 1971, they set up a commission, and the commission did a comprehensive plan of the entire village. And then after that, everything was piecemeal. 83, 85, 2008, 2009, when they attacked the business district and the large box stores. They've never done a comprehensive plan. And I, for one, will challenge the village if they go ahead and proceed with this moratorium and they come up with a code that only affects what they call the waterfront moratorium. And then they lump in non-waterfront property as part of it, meaning the Scavonis. So anyway, if you got any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Does the board have any questions for Mr. Jones?
I mean, I think you answered most of them, Mr. Downs, but could you just once again state clearly why you disagree with Mr. Creed's contention that this is basically seeking exemption from the moratorium? Are you basically saying you think that the moratorium shouldn't necessarily be the guiding principle here because of the history you just talked about? Or are you saying it does not in fact violate or
this particular property is unique in the sense that the owners were deprived of their property because of a remediation problem with the next door neighbor, National Grid. They agreed to have their building removed and then the property given back to them at a later date. Not necessarily given back, they never lost the deed, but they were prohibited from building on that property until National Grid finished their remediation. And then they were given a certain period of time within which to file an application, which they did. I was very careful making it timely. Their first application was for a 3-story building, consistent with another building that's been built, actually three buildings, those condos. Then they reduced it to 2, and then now they've reduced it to 1. Is there a large attic? Absolutely. Absolutely. And maybe someday we'll be back here for a use variance. We don't know. Excuse me, not a use variance. We'll be back here for an area variance because I don't have parking for that attic if we convert it to something else. But that's another case, and it's not before you. And I made that very clear in a letter that I sent to the board that our discussion last month about the possible use of the second floor or the attic was a possibility, and it's not part of this case. It was to inform the board of what a possible situation could be at a later date. And that was it. So, I mean, if there's ever a case that cries out for relief, this is it. Where are you going to find another case in this village where the people have been deprived of their property since 2007, 2008?
No, I understand the history, but so are you, though, to be clear, saying that because of that history, this case does deserve an exception from the
Yes.
moratorium?
And another reason, the moratorium was designed for the waterfront. It was basically Bay Street and what could happen with several of those parcels that are down there that could get developed. And then it morphed into West Water Street, Long Island Avenue. On the upland side, I could see if they did the waterfront side, that would make sense. It's part, there's a nexus there. But to go across the street and start putting a moratorium in there so that people can't do anything with those properties, doesn't make sense to me. I think I think it could be challenged at a later date, but we're not interested in doing that. We just want to get through this process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions? Any further questions from the audience, please? Comments?
If I just have 1 minute to just briefly respond to Mr. Downs' points. I understand he doesn't like the moratorium. I understand he doesn't believe the goals are genuine, but that's not an issue for this board. This is the law in the village right now. And if you are going to grant an exemption, you have to follow what is in the code. And there's a separate and independent requirement that you make a specific finding that this doesn't undermine the goals or have an adverse effect on it. That's exactly what it does. And I would respectfully submit that you should follow what is in the law and not exemption. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let me make a comment to that, because it's very apropos. Had the Scavonis designed the identical building that was there, which you have a copy of, it's a very low-lying building, very drab looking. It was actually a barracks at one time, or something similar with a military piece of military housing. They wouldn't even need a building permit. It's right in Mr. Thiel's letter. You can build without a site plan, you can build without a building permit, you can do anything you want. And I had that conversation with Mr. Esposito, who was then the building inspector, and he wrote me letters saying, your plans don't conform to the old building. If you make the old building, I don't have jurisdiction. If you create a new building, then I do have jurisdiction. My clients chose to build something different that would have a nicer appeal to it than the old drab building that was there. Plain and simple. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, the board did discuss this application last month under the guise of this being reconstructed as a one-story structure that it had been. However, there are changes to this building. And as for the comments this evening, I feel that we should table this application until we speak with council. To Mr. Creeksman's point, the substantive requirements under section B, we should discuss this with council. I feel that we should adjourn this until.
What's subsection B? I don't recall it.
No exemption shall be granted hereunder unless the zoning board shall specifically find and determine and shall set forth in its resolution granting such exemption that 1, failure to grant such an exemption to the petitioner will cause the petitioner undue hardship. And it goes into 2, grant of the exemption, even if the application for which the exemption is sought is approved, will clearly have no adverse effect upon any of the village's goals or objectives in undertaking its update of the village comprehensive plan or in adopting this local law. So some of this language here, this is legal technicalities here that I feel we should adjourn until this board is a little bit better apprised. And also that we do this to the letter of the law in terms of we have opposition from 2 attorneys here. And I feel it would be best to just adjourn this until we get legal counsel.
It's not my objection, that's all.
Yes,
It is a sensible action for the board to take because they do have to get an update on where the study is now to apply subsection 3 of the exemption section.
No, I mean, that's a decision they have to make. I can't object. I can object to it. I can't overturn it. But
I wanted to respond.
I
to
have
your
not
objection
heard
direct.
a word in the last couple of months as to what the goals and objectives are, number 1, and number 2, how long it's going to take to do it. When they started this out, they said 6 months, that's it, that's all we need. 6 months turned into a year and a half, and now we're going into 2 years. So how many more years is it going to be before we find out what these goals and objectives are?
This board is not.
Oh, of course, it's not, yeah, but they have the ability to say, despite the fact that this moratorium is going on and on and on, we can end it for this particular applicant.
If you meet the requirements of the exemption.
Well, I think
section.
we did. I think my petition satisfies that
That's
requirement,
the
but it's up to this
decision.
board to make that decision.
Right, but they can't hurry the study along and take any of those actions. They can only make this decision.
They can't do anything with the study. They have nothing to say about it. It's a trustees matter.
Correct.
And the trustees don't seem to be pushing.
That's a matter to the trustees.
Well, we'll take up the mayor and the trustees, as to when they're gonna end this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, are you gonna adjourn the other case as well?
I believe that.
On your request.
Not mine, no, it's not on my request. I'm happy to proceed with it.
I believe we have no choice but to adjourn the pending application, which is on the agenda this evening for this project.
That application is in front of the planning board for secret. This board can hear the application, but it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense until you get a secret determination on it, so that you understand the environmental implications and all of the information that comes out of secret. So it is a sensible route to take. I would prefer that the applicant make the application to adjourn.
No, I'm not gonna do that. This case has been adjourned too many times. I think it's to my client's detriment if we continue to adjourn it, but you have the final say, obviously. And all I can say is that as far as secret is concerned, the earliest we're gonna see anything is gonna be after your October meeting. Because the planning board doesn't meet until a week after you, and nothing is gonna happen at the October planning board meeting this month.
All right, so if you would like, we can adjourn this correspondence requiring action. We can keep the public hearing open for item number 6 for
You should deal with them separately.
Separately.
So deal
That's
with
right.
the exemption request, which will keep open for 30 days to gather information from the board's trustees, then separately call item number 6. Take action.
Okay, so to answer your question, Mr. Clemens, please ask for a motion to. Oh, do you have,
I wanted to make a point if I'm permitted, which is I would respectfully submit that the application shouldn't be heard unless there is first an exemption that's granted. I think it was put on the agenda by someone with the hope that that exemption might be granted.
No, it wasn't. It was on last month. You weren't here. We were on the calendar last month for discussion.
Okay, regardless, I would submit that the board shouldn't hear that application without an exemption, because without the exemption, it was subject to the moratorium. And I think it may have been put on before someone realized it was subject.
No, the moratorium does not prevent someone from speaking about an application. It prevents the board from making a decision on that application.
I think it's been the practice of this village to not schedule hearings on applications that are subject to a moratorium. So I would respectfully submit that it should be adjourned.
You need to follow the law. The law says I'm entitled to have a hearing. I can have a hearing. They just can't make a decision. You're the one that's saying, you got to read the letter of the law. I'm reading the letter of the law, and it says that this board can hear the case. You just can't decide it. And you can't decide it for secret as well. There's a second reason. But be that as it may, I understand you're going to adjourn both, and it's something I have to live with, but I do want to note my objection on the record. Thank you.
thank you. So with that said, can I please get a motion to adjourn the public hearing on this matter?
So
All in favor? Thank you.
For the record, our next meeting is October 19th.
Under old business, we're going to adjourn Ryson Properties, right, 24 Ryson Street. Can I please get a motion to adjourn the public hearing on this application? So moved. Second. All in favor? Under old business, item number 2, 11 Washington Street.
Good evening, Chairman, board members. Laura Tuman, 402 Main Street, on behalf of the applicant, Washington East LLC.
And you've been sworn in prior?
Yes.
Okay.
Been here before, had a
Yes.
couple of adjournments for the COVID and vacation, so back again, hoping we can close the book today. So I'd like to just give a quick summary because there are several new board members here, if I am allowed to do so.
Yes, please.
So this is a fairly minor variance request. The homeowner is requesting the construction, even though it's not really a new construction, of a 10 by 24 poolside patio. The lot is a very small, tiny lot in the village of Sag Harbor. So therefore it is constrained. Basically, anything you do on the property would require a variance from this board. There is a current patio that you see on the survey, and the patio is 10 by 24. It is key size gravel. The homeowner just recently purchased the property, has 2 small young children, and would like to put poolside patio furniture on it. As you all know, key size gravel is not very sturdy, for young children or for patio furniture. So he was hoping to, the only change he is hoping to do is to change the material of the existing patio. It's not making it bigger. It's not making it any difference. You're not changing any use of the property or of the actual poolside area. It's just a change in material. So that's basically the only variance that is being requested. The homeowner has looked at alternative configurations for the patio at the request of this board previously, looking at different sites, sizes, etc. And because of the slope of the backyard, which is very tiny, it's almost impossible to put it somewhere else on the property. I did submit into the record at a previous meeting. I put in 5 variants that I feel set the precedent for issuance of this variance. I could just briefly go through the list: 16 Walker Avenue, 17 Montauk Ave, 42 Suffolk Street, 69 Garden Street, and 80 Redwood. And lastly, I just want to also put into the record that we have received no objections from any of the neighboring property owners or anyone actually in the village at all.
Can I just address the sites that you did? None of them have any relevance to this property.
It's difficult to.
Well, but they don't have any. 16 Walker was a lot coverage variance, not a setback variance. 17 Montauk Avenue was a lot 2 front yards, and it was a small property, so that doesn't really. 42 Suffolk Street was a pre-existing non-conforming condition. 59 Garden Street was a lot with 3 front yards, and 80 Redwood was waterfront property. So none of them have any bearing on this property. Just to put that into it.
Sure, as you know, obviously every site is
Well, that's the point. It's a
correct, exactly. I submitted those into the record because there were basically larger or similar side yard variances requested specifically for patios or poolside patios. And so several of those were submitted because of that, either like a 4.9 foot rear relief or 15 foot in some cases. But you do make a point that not every application can be compared to another property because every property is so site specific.
Just gets listed on those properties with specific hardships because of the configuration of the property. Your property really doesn't have any of those hardships.
Can I ask you, is the homeowner the individual who constructed this pool?
No, sir. Done by a prior homeowner.
Yes,
Yep.
because the condition is such that it's a very awkward step from the house to
It is,
an
you step
elevated
up
pool.
and yes.
Yes,
So it was not his doing, it was done by the previous property owner. You kind of inherit, these situations unfortunately sometimes.
that's right. Thank you.
Karen, can you, I don't know if you have the history, but we had proposed a compromise on this, which wasn't accepted. Can you remember? I spent so long. I don't remember what the compromise was.
They decided that they.
I know they didn't like the
They
compromise. They just
Correct.
wanted the other board, the new board members to.
Right.
Do you, Alex, do you remember what the compromise was?
There was some discussion about
Material?
cutting
No, was
it
a
down to
setback.
an 8 by 24,
It was-
2 feet, but the homeowner decided would prefer not to.
So we had suggested that we would approve it if they made an 8-foot setback here instead of 6.
Right. The reasoning was that a typical standard pool lounger is 8 feet in itself. So that would allow no stable footing to walk around it.
At present, you don't need a variance with the stone.
Correct, with quayside gravel, you do not need, for the current existing,
But did you give consideration of putting grass?
the homeowner did what would prefer to have a stable.
But you have a very small area and you have a pool, and we made consideration. This was a precedent in terms of, you basically did, you have, as I see it, have made it a precedent by changing it to a patio that's non-compliant in terms of water and so forth.
Oh, there was one, can I just interrupt? I'm sorry. There was, Carrie, there was one other thing, and I don't remember. We had determined that there were 2 different setbacks. There was a pool setback and an accessory setback, and it was determined that the patio was not part of the pool, it was an accessory setback, correct? That would be-
Correct, so
and it
the
wasn't-
setback
it was
is
only
noted was
10.
correct, right? We had some discussion about that, so what we had was
So
correct in the application.
The setback's really only 10. Not 15.
And again, it's in our opinion, a very minor variance request. The only thing that's changing is material. We did try to look at alternatives and alternative locations, but
Thank you. Is there anyone from the audience who'd like to speak on this? No. I'd like to run through the board and
that would be appreciated. I think everyone's ready to wrap this up.
yes, I'll start with Mr. Fisher. Do you have any thoughts on the application?
I'd like to see some reduction in
We did look at alternatives to reduce coverage or even the 3.7 feet of relief requested from the side yard. Again, it was very difficult to maintain that same size. Again, we would prefer the size to actually fit 4 pool loungers for the family of 4 on the property. And the lot is so constrained. I'm not sure, I believe at least one of the board members, I think, had stopped there previously. I don't recall, but it's a very tiny backyard. It's really hard to fit anything in the slope, and the retaining walls make it almost nearly impossible.
Alex, would you like to comment?
Yes, with the note that I missed the last 2 meetings, so it's possible I missed some of the.
I actually missed the last 2 because of COVID and vacation, so.
All right. Well, then I'm gonna blame bad memory. But I will say this, that I do understand the applicant's resistance to the 8-foot setback limit, because it's true, you can't, there's not much room to get around that.
Right, I'm happy to submit a pool lounge, the diagram to the record if you'd like me to. I did.
No, I
Okay.
get that inherently. I have basic math skills, so I can understand how
Yeah.
you might walk around an 8-foot long shaped lounge chair. So I'm sympathetic with that argument. Can you just remind me, someone, are we talking about a paved surface? Right?
It is a bluestone
Bluestone.
pavers,
Okay.
bluestone pavers.
So could the problem be solved, and again, forgive me if this is old news, but could the problem be solved, or are you willing to consider an alternative pervious surface that wouldn't?
I believe he has already looked.
Like pebbles, which are very popular now, a lot of people that put pebbles down around pools.
He has looked at different size pebbles because there are kind of like pea size right now.
Yeah, it's
Just
very
with
comfortable. and, yeah.
with the patio, the furniture, not wanting it to move, especially with the young.
That sounds
kids
a
and-
little precious, but.
Yeah, no, I understand.
it seems to me that there's ways to solve that problem, having the room you need, but maybe considering some other services that might allow you to get around this restriction. Otherwise, I don't know how despite that tightness of the configuration, I'm not sure how we can justify those further suggestions.
And do you have a comment?
I think I made my comments because of the fact that they put the blue stones in the area, and I was, as he indicated, was there other options? And that's why I indicated grass. If there was grass, you would not need to have a variance. And there is grass in the back of that house.
Correct, but with all due respect, the bluestone patio surrounding a pool is a fairly standard thing.
Feature,
Correct.
one big lot.
Right, this is a tiny lot with, not an egregious ask.
No, it's not. It's not a wild ask. Is there a way to do it again? Because I don't have the diagram from it, so I'm behind. Don't have that whole file in front of me, but can you have loose on one end of the pool and still meet the? Because you don't necessarily.
Not enough, you can barely put anything, you can't really put anything on either end of, no, and the other three sides you can't, because there's no room between the house and the pool, and then the pool and the retaining wall, and on the other side also the retaining wall.
We did suggest.
Between the house and the pool, right, but
Problems with grade.
it's probably about 3 feet or so.
We Suggested they put it here. Well, there are, they didn't want to go there.
Yeah, I think your request is reasonable. We all like loose stone patio around the pool, but however, you do have a very constrained site here, and so I think that your client has to be perhaps a little more flexible in figuring out creative solution.
I've watched the past meetings and the compromise was the 8 foot by 24 foot, which would reduce the coverage. Is that something that?
Right, it would
should be-
reduce the coverage to 25.08% lot coverage and down to 1.7 of side yard setback. But again, the 8 foot is really difficult. You can't put, the whole purpose is so that he could put 4 lounge chairs for his family of 4. And it's, the lounge chairs are 8 foot.
The concern with this is really that the activity, the pool activity or sound, it's adjacent to a yard which has no screening. In looking at the survey, and I think the
Property is fairly well screened, lush vegetation.
So on the western side, you have a wall, there's some screening on top, but.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a 17-foot setback between the pool and the lot line.
And again, it's not changing any use of the pool. The pool's being used, has been used, it's been put in by the previous homeowner. There's no change. There's the same amount of noise from the pool as it was, it's not going to change the use of the backyard or the pool. It's
Right. Well, the reason why I asked you who constructed this pool, because they created a difficult and what I believe to be an unsafe condition in terms of creating a patio, which would have a step from the back door to the pool. So I think that you don't have too much of a choice but to put this patio where it is. It's just a question of the lot coverage, and if the board felt that this is a reasonable request. So I think we can potentially take it to a vote if you'd like to go through the.
I'd
vote.
appreciate that.
Would you like that?
Yeah.
Or would you like to come back?
I think a vote tonight.
Okay, all right. I'll start with Mr. Fisher. Would you like to vote again or nay on this application? Mr. Matheson. Mr. Baker.
I vote nay, because I think the lot coverage could be reduced. I understand the setback, but it's been reduced to 10. That lot.
I can concur with my colleague.
So we've got an overwhelming majority against, and
Can I ask, Chairman, what your,
my thoughts that you had a good compromise, and I feel that if you had come back with the 8x24, which was agreed upon, that we could approve this. So I will also vote nay. However, we can leave this up to you if you wish to come back to this board with a change.
I know at this point in time, the homeowner likely would not, but in the future, I can't say that he wouldn't want to come back at some point, but as of right now, I think he just wants to close this and wrap it up.
Okay, thank you. So with that said, can I please get a motion to close the public hearing on 11 Washington Street?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Gotcha. Thank you. Good to see you.
Item number 3 is 34 High Street, which is adjourned. Can I please get a motion to adjourn the public hearing for 34 High Street? All in favor? Item number 4, 63 Main Street, which is Page Main LLC.
Good evening, board members. Tiffany Scarlato, 45 Division Street, Sag Harbor for the applicant. I'm here with Sal Chiarelli as well, who is the project architect. Just give us a few minutes. We're going to get those things set up. For the board members who are new, while we're setting that up, I'll just give you a brief overview of what we're doing. The application is for a proposed enhancement of Page Restaurant, which is right next door, via the adaptive reuse of the existing second floor apartment into what we would call Page Hall, which would be a much needed purpose-driven event space in the Village Business District and an expansion of the existing Page Restaurant at 63 Main Street. Currently, Page services a number of private events every year, including but not limited to the Sag Harbor Chamber, the Steinbeck Fund, Catholic Charities, Sag Harbor Schools, the YMCA, various political committees, as well as other public and private events that promote our village. This new space would serve as a year-round small private event space that would include community functions, political events, weddings, bridal and baby showers, holiday parties, and corporate events. Currently, space dedicated to private events in the Sag Harbor area is extremely limited and is evidenced by the number of events that Page currently books at the restaurant space. All that being said, obviously we've had issues during COVID, but the reason they started this project was because many of their reservations were becoming larger and larger party type reservations. Page, with its stellar reputation as a local leader in aquaponic and organic farm movement, intends to dedicate that same level of food service to Page Hall and will rely upon local farmers, fishers, and distributors as it creates a uniquely Sag Harbor healthy dining and event experience. Part of what is included in the project is the continuation of the aquaponics that exists on the property. The proposed enhancement will meet a longstanding demand of the Village Business District and will function as an economic engine via new job creation on a year-round basis. I guess getting someone to work there is a different story. There will be a new commercial kitchen on the second floor with a new wet service bar and 80-person dining service. We have made significant changes to the plans that we'll go over with you, but the bar and outdoor lounge area currently being utilized by Backpage as an outdoor private dining area and or late night venue will be eliminated through this proposal. And that space will be reconfigured and built to accommodate a new entryway. Although I believe that has changed at this point. We do require a number of variances for the project, and When Sal is ready, I'll turn the microphone over to him to go over with what the changes in the project are and how this site is proposed to operate. There was some concern at both the planning board and I think before this board about the entrance for the property being back on Division Street and creating a traffic issue back there that we didn't necessarily want to create. And so we took those comments into consideration and have not changed any of the variances. I think actually the lot coverage request has been reduced, but we've made some changes to the plans for your consideration. The other thing that I wanted to speak with the board about, because it is one of the more significant issues that we have, is a parking variance that we requested. We require 17 parking spaces and 1 truck loading space that we're unable to provide on site. The client has entered into a number of letters of intent with various property owners in the village, namely at 32 Bridge Street, 28 Bridge Street, and 11 Spring Street. Give them nearly adequate parking in the off hours that would mitigate the parking needs as previously articulated, there being an 18 space deficiency. Whether the board is willing to accept those as mitigation or not, I guess it's a question for the board to speak about this evening. And if you want to have a little bit of a conversation about that now while they're getting this hooked up, I suppose now is a good time to do that.
Would be a great time to do that because the parking is a big consideration. So you could please elaborate.
Okay, so we're required to provide a number of parking spaces on site that we're obviously unable to provide. That number is currently 17 with 1 truck loading space. So we're seeking a variance of a total of 18 parking spaces, 17 car and 1 truck. What the applicant is proposing to do is to rent space from other businesses in the village that would equate to, I think, almost 17 parking spaces. I think I got to 16. And the question for the village and for this board is whether they would consider that adequate mitigation in an attempt to gain approval for the project. As I said, if we were able to, as soon as we received approval, we'd be able to enter into those leases. But we do have letters of intent signed that I will submit to the board. I understand that this is also part of the secret process in front of the planning board, so those would be submitted and evaluated by them as well as part of that process. And the idea here is to have parking available at different times of the day that are generally used for sort of daytime businesses that would be available for Page and Page's expansion in the evening hours and on weekend hours when these other establishments are not open. There we go. Someday we'll get there. You know, one of the things that we've been talking about in the village for a long time, and I know it was the subject of one of the consultant that was hired to rewrite the village code. One of the things they had talked about was sort of a comprehensive village parking plan where somehow we could have some type of bank of parking or be able to trade off parking and be able to utilize all of the parking spaces we have in the village at various times of the day as is needed. And so I think this goes a little bit towards that goal. And I would just ask for feedback from the board with respect to how you feel about that, so that when we go to the planning board, I'm able to articulate that to them as well. As I said, it is a little bit unusual. It's not something that's specifically permitted in the code itself as legal, but it could serve as mitigation with respect to this board's evaluation of the parking requirements.
Thank you.
I'll turn it now over to Sal Chiarelli, who is the project architect, to just talk about a little bit of how we've changed sort of how the project is going to work and the movement inside the building, which just changes the flow over to the alleyway here on in between.
Have you presented before this board? Yes. So you can swear in. Okay, thank you.
So just a couple of quick numbers before I jump into the plan, just because of how it's described on the agenda. Overall, our lot coverage, gross floor area, everything's been reduced a bit. So let's say overall gross floor area has been reduced by 452 square feet. Lot coverage has been reduced by 108 square feet. Roof coverage has been reduced by 588 square feet. And building coverage has been reduced by 48 square feet. Parking and setbacks stay the same. So overall, the idea for the change is to make the building a little more user and public friendly. One of the idea, originally, and I know you probably aren't too familiar with the previous set, but the main entry to this new second floor space was off Division Street. Now it's, the main entry has now become off the alleyway from Main Street. And part of that being, we can get a better elevator for ADA, the public that can accommodate more than just a wheelchair. Another point of this project was to have ADA access from Main Street to Division Street, but the way to do that was to go through our building, and the previous use of that space before it was now the entry was like a wine and a lounge, and more of a private space. So for that space to become a bit more public, it'd be easier access up to the ramp from the Main Street side to the Division Street side. Another reason for these changes was again to expand that aquaponics system. We're making the roof accessible, and we're doing greenhouses and expanding the aquaponics and solar panels. We're going to look into passive hot water heating, and again, a way to bring the public in and teach them about the system and how fish are incorporated and so on. So again, that roof space, those systems can now cover the mechanical equipment. And then on the ground floor, again, changes because outdoor dining has become more favorable. We're trying to just reserve space to move seats where back page currently is. And where originally we had a covered area where it was just for an entry, which now our new entry off the alleyway can accommodate more people to be inside the building. And whether they're waiting for the event or just gathering in general. And then also, giving back to the public, we were having these gallery spaces, and we're still going to have that space here. Again with our entry and our second floor, this hallway space here will accommodate that, for local artists or whatever exhibitions can, we still have a space to display that. And then we jump to, this is that rooftop space we're speaking about here. So these, again, above the existing Main Street side would be the new greenhouses. And then just overall expanding our idea of farm to table and keeping the produce local. I just wanted to get to 3D massing so again we can see where we are with existing versus proposed. So, this is on the A6 sheet, and basically the blue is what's existing, and the gray area is where we're adding on to. So, it's easy for you to see. Versus, and I can try to pull it up, versus our previous scheme was a bit more bulky in terms of the massing. This is where we were. And also, again, in relation to our reduction of the project, let's also respect the jailhouse. That was a concern. We were right on the property line. Now we've backed up 2 feet off the property line just to give a little more relief off jailhouse.
Right, so I think that's a halfway decent overview of, the project and where we've made some changes. Obviously, we have to go back to the planning board. The submission that this board just received has been sent to the planning board as well. I spoke to Kathy Eisman today, who hadn't had time yet to review it, but we'll let you go before the planning board meeting. But again, this was just to give you an overview of the plans, and how they've changed. We do have to do secret in front of the planning board. They had requested a historic analysis of the jail, which we also submitted to this board. And I would just, at this point, ask the board for some direction with respect to the letters of intent, and if the board has any comments with respect to the idea of renting spaces on other properties where parking is available in order to mitigate the parking requirements that are required for this site.
Let me answer that question, please. It's an unusual request. It's unique in that, to my knowledge, I have not heard anything where one can potentially lease parking spaces. But I think that the larger concern here is the extent of increase to the building and also the potential use. On Main Street, given the many restaurants which we have, on average, the occupancy is about 80 to 100 seats. This has the potential to double the potential capacity on a given restaurant. The precedent here could be detrimental in that what would prevent an applicant with a similar type business to abandon second floor bedrooms with the intent to add 80 seats to the establishment. And that's my primary concern over the parking. So I think we need to deal with the biggest issue first. The architect also mentioned rooftop gathering, which I think is uncharacteristic for the village in terms of having occupants on a roof. It's not been done before. We don't have gatherings where a drink could mistakenly or an accident could happen on Main Street. But the bigger issue is also the parking. You've reduced the coverage. It was at 98%. So still no room for a truck for delivery, which makes this a very difficult business in terms of Division Street is the thoroughfare. It's quite a busy road, as the planning board has pointed out. I think it'd be difficult to accommodate this type of business with the increased use, intensified use, where a truck could conceivably deliver without creating a traffic issue on Division. You pointed out that the new entry is no longer on Division, but rather the alleyway. Given the fact that I think that's neither here nor there, because you do have to access this building either from Main Street or Division. So where the front door, the point of entry on the structure may not be, it's sort of an invalid point to my personal opinion, but the fact that it's a catering hall, again, it's a fine line in terms of it's a dining establishment, or the use is perceived as such, where this type of a request could set precedent with other establishments. And those are my comments aside from the parking. But I'd like to ask if anyone from the audience would like to speak on this.
I can just address a couple of your comments,
Yes.
particularly before that, particularly with regard to the use of the second floor. Right now it is an apartment. It was an apartment for the owners of the property who no longer own the property, so it was a single family that lived there. There's nothing currently in the zoning code that prohibits commercial from moving on to the second floor. We are in a commercial district. So I understand the concern over losing apartments, but at the same time, there's nothing in the code that prohibits an expansion to the second floor. With respect to the number of seats and the parking issues that creates and the precedent that could potentially be set, I have a couple of things to say about it. The first being that there is a provision of the village code that was adopted a few years ago, which not every restaurant has taken advantage of, which allowed for the increase of seating in a restaurant without providing for additional parking. So the seating requirement for a restaurant went from one space for every 3 seats to 1 space for every 4 seats. So now that increase in seating in a restaurant is achieved merely by a letter to the building inspector, who then issues an updated certificate of occupancy, so long as those seats meet fire code, issues an updated certificate of occupancy without the requirement of extra parking. And by bringing that up, what I mean to do is sort of bring us into a little bit more of a holistic conversation about parking, because there are obviously things that happen around the village that relate to parking that this particular board never sees. For example, there are a lot of charter boats in the village right now. We've seen that all summer long. And I'm not saying those things are wrong, but those charter boats are being given permits by the village board of trustees to operate a charter in the village. And you're not seeing any of the upland effects of that, which are parking issues. The code that I just mentioned that allows for the increase in restaurant seating triggers, in concept, a parking requirement, which is why I think we need to start having a more holistic conversation about the use of parking in the village and how do we make sure that we start using all of the parking spaces that are available for whichever use we need to be able to use them for, and work it out between the businesses as to how those parking spaces are utilized. I could come up with about 4 other examples of how, parking never touches this board. And so to saddle this particular applicant with a parking requirement when there are all these other things happening in the village makes it very difficult for us, because we're sort of, the applicant is sort of left saying to himself, well, how do I get stuck with all of this when there's a 40-person charter boat running off Long Wharf, and there are 3 more charter boats running off of various village docks and private docks in the area that are causing a traffic parking issue. There is an automatic increase in the seating available in a restaurant, which does not trigger a parking requirement in front of this board. So I know that we're sort of at a crossroads with respect to parking. And I think that what we're trying to do is propose a different way of looking at parking in the village and a different way of effectuating parking needs as they arise, irrespective of how you feel about the use, whether it's necessary or anything like that. The conversation about parking, I think, is a much larger one that we need to have, and there are a lot of issues out there surrounding parking that I would like the board to consider when you're considering parking variances and requests as they come in.
Can I just ask a question, Paul?
Yes.
Ms. Gallo, I agree. It sounds like we have a much bigger parking issue in the village that needs to be addressed, and it's not the job of this board to do so.
Right.
But given that we're all keenly aware of that fact, and we do have the right to restrict parking through variance applications and so on, I don't think we have much choice, but in sensitivity to that large parking issue, to make sure that we're doing our piece, at least make sure that the village doesn't get overrun with cars and have no place, which have no place to park. So I encourage us all to team up, the clients and this board and everybody else in the village, to try and address that larger issue. But I don't think that's necessarily an argument for us to say, well, it's a bigger issue than us, so let's just let it go through here. Second item is a question, which is that 3 to 4 seat to parking space ratio you mentioned.
Mhm.
So that's reflected in the 67 spots that are required.
Yes.
That's 4 ratio.
Yes. Part of the application, I'm sorry to interrupt, part of the application included, and it's probably in your file somewhere, included a calculation on the pre-existing parking, the increase in seats. So that's accounted for in your application, right? That's how we got to 17 or 18 parking space variance.
I guess the other parking issue that I see is that this is an events venue. where people all arrive at the same time. And a lot of people arrive at the same time. With a restaurant, people come and go. But everybody's gonna arrive at the same time. If you're at a Hilton Hotel in the suburbs, there's a big parking lot, everybody just arrives and parks. That can't happen here. So I don't know how that works.
Right, the planning board has asked us for a comprehensive traffic plan and parking plan, and we're working on that right now. I just wanted to bring to your attention the idea that there could be other possible remedies for that and mitigation for that. Because as we move forward here in the village, we're going to find that in fact, there is not enough parking, and we can't let parking requirements drive zoning. I would rather have zoning drive zoning
Yeah.
and not zone based on parking requirements.
I'm just trying to think of where are these spaces that you're going to rent that aren't used at night already?
Right, and that's-
Now, at night, try to find a parking place. Now. No.
Right now, it's pretty easy.
All the
Even in
lots.
the peripheral areas.
Yeah.
How would that work?
Right, but these are in private lots that would be open only for this purpose in the evening.
But how many private lots actually are?
Are they been identified? Just so that
Yes.
we know?
Yes, 32 Bridge Street, for which they have agreed to 3 parking spaces. And I will submit these to the board, I just didn't have an opportunity to. The other one is 28 Bridge Street, which is 5 parking spaces. The other is 11 Spring Street, which has agreed to between 5 and 7 parking spaces. 11 Bridge. I'm sorry, not 11 Bridge. Spring, I'm sorry, 11 Spring. Green is on Bridge Street.
Could you elaborate again on the roof, the function of the roof, and what are your plans on the roof?
So it was to bring more public awareness to the farm, the table approach, and right now there's a small aquaponic system. It's like mixed within the mechanical equipment, and there's no chance for anyone to really appreciate it much. So to expand that system and on the roof, and again, it wouldn't be a place so much to gather and stay there for a while. It's kind of like a toured thing for maybe a half hour or so. Let's say you get a sense of what we're doing. But to make it more publicly known, to bring more passive solutions to our building, like greenhouses, solar, and things like that. So
And the other concern I have is the fire code and the second floor.
Yeah.
In terms of, this is basically going to be utilized as a banquet hall. So how many people do you think will be allowed in there? And that'd be a major hazard.
on the roof or on the
No,
side?
on the second floor.
So we had done when we were first planning out the building, we, how much people can fit in that space by, it's like a 1 person to 15 square feet ratio, based on the amount of tables. But we're actually allowed over 100 people in that space based off the building code. And so we're actually reduced it to 80 just for the parking and being a little more.
And the other concern I have in terms of the precedent is that there are other restaurants in the area, and that this could be concerning that there'd be a multiplicity of banquet halls coming. We're talking about parking and then allowing a variance in terms of what you're doing and what would stop them from the other restaurants pursuing their activities.
I guess they have to find parking agreements too, right?
Well, it really is a site-based evaluation and obviously the board's decisions on various applications are site-specific. There aren't very many buildings in the village right now where this is probably a plausible application. And just to speak a little bit to any roof deck, so to speak, or anything like that, just across the street, I believe at Sag Harbor Cinema, there is one there as well. which is relatively new and which was approved.
And
By
the
this
thing
board as
that,
well as the planning.
you
board.
know, it also concerns me is each side and multiplicity of areas. You talk about 0 feet, and I think that this is a very concerned area because you do have spacing problems. with the building. And, I just have difficulty trying to determine the number of people going in and out, either from Division Street or from the main street. So, and I have one more question. And that's number 2, taking into account, it says although under the permitted 50%, the resulting gross floor shall not exceed a total of 3,000 square feet. Therefore, a relief is required for the same. What's the relief?
Any use greater than 3,000 square feet in the village business district requires variance.
I understand that. And what are you asking for? Square footage?
Let's say more feet, it doesn't hurt. Therefore, there would be a variance.
We're only seeking a variance for the increase. The notice itself is quite difficult to read, but my understanding is that we're looking for.
Oh, that's over. So existing is 6,000
Mhm.
and we're increasing another 1,690.
So we're adding a 1,690 square feet to the building.
So is that 7,600?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
So
That's overall.
that's the overall size of the building,
That's the whole,
exactly.
so the total.
So the 3,000 is just, as I said, once you go over that number, it requires an additional layer.
And just to address the Sag Harbor Cinema thing, I know that we did require them to pull back so the roof deck area so that you wouldn't see people walking around in the street.
Mhm.
We did make some provision for that.
Mr. Baker is correct. I was a member of the architectural review board when cinema was approved. And it was contentious to have that roof deck access where one could see occupants of the building on the roof. And therefore the railing was done in such a manner to prevent any sight of a table, an umbrella, a person, and specifically to make an occupant not visible from across the street or the road. So the architects at the time were Wren Croxton and Associates, and they did studies of that if you want to look at the meeting minutes, but we would discourage any type of use at that time. Most likely the architectural review board would as well.
Right, and I will definitely look at that. We're not proposing to have any dining on that roof deck. We're not proposing to have any people out there, as Sal had indicated. Part of the project, part of the project ownership wants to call the Sag Harbor Experience, which is really an installation of artwork and, sort of recollections of the village. The Sag Harbor Jail is going to be part of that because it is right next door. And it's a very underutilized part of the history of the village. So there's a whole other element to the project, which is sort of visitor friendly, so to speak. And so it's not the intention to have people on the roof eating, drinking, or doing anything like that. It's merely would really sort of be to bring them up there and say, oh, look at what's going on up here. And we're going to go downstairs and have that salad for dinner.
Can I make a few comment? That seems unrealistic to me over time. It's hard to imagine a nice space outdoors. It's rare in Sag Harbor, not being able to use taking glasses of wine, et cetera. So my general kind of feeling about this, and again, forgive me, Mr. Chairman, and others if I've forgotten some of the details from previous conversations, but again, we're drawing on the community. But on the whole, this just seems like a hugely ambitious project. Where a huge expansion and doubling of number of diners and so on is being proposed, event space, a huge request for variance or parking spots, et cetera. And if you look at the proposed building coverage variance requests and overall lot coverage requests, I mean, 98% lot coverage, when 70% is required. I don't even know, and you, Scott and Mr. Chairman, to know what the history is, but if this is a residential application, no one would ever consider giving them this kind of excess of proposed lot and building coverage. So is there a precedent though to treat commercial facilities and applications differently and to allow such an excess of lot and building coverage? Because these are enormous numbers. And I just kind of back to the applicant, my question is, couldn't you guys make use of that extra space that you do have? I do understand the desire, but do something slightly more modest, and you're kind of throwing everything in the kitchen sink here. I mean, you're trying to get it all, and there's just, it seems obvious, even without study, that there's going to have an impact on the parking and.
Certainly go back and speak with them about that.
So I just don't know why we're even considering such excessive variance. One question.
So we're entertaining those requests or hearing them, but I think to Mr. Matheson's point, that the building does lend itself to a second floor addition to some extent, but not to the extent where the 98% lot coverage is something that I don't have any studies, or if you could find a property, unless it's pre-existing non-conforming, that's even close to that number. So where 70% is required. Yeah.
It is one of the first, commercial developments to come in and ask for an expansion in a very long time. I think the last one that had any type of major expansion was probably the Sag building, which did require a parking variance as well.
I'm all for the request for expansion. I totally get it. In the sense that you do have some space to expand. It just seems this is a very ambitious and large expansion. That's Beacon has rooftop activity. And it's a place I could think of that's rooftop.
Second floor. The second floor structure,
Second floor.
right, but not this.
So unless the board has any other questions, like I said, we were here just to get some feedback from the board. We haven't been here in quite a while. There are new board members. We wanted to know how the board felt about it. And we can go back to the applicant. We'll be at the planning board in the next few weeks, and then we'll be back here again. Hopefully with some modifications.
Thank you. I did not get a chance to ask the public, who would like to speak on this? Okay, no one. All right, thank you for the presentation. Can I please get a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Item number 5 is 36 Hamilton Street.
Dennis Downs, 34 Bay Street, Sag Harbor, New York. Currently applicant. Last month's meeting, you requested I bring you a survey.
I gave them one.
It shows 7-foot side yard and rear yard setback. If I move closer to that 200-year-old tree, and on this side. That was the only request that you made last month.
Is there anyone who would like to speak on this application? No. To recap, Mr. Downs, the setbacks have been, the request for the setbacks have been decreased in terms of the 7 foot as shown. on both of the side and the rear yards. It was noted that we had letters of support from adjacent neighbors. We have a letter of support from neighbor across the street. We also discussed that the degree of screening which exists between the property to the west and also to the south is such that the 7-foot seems to be quite an adequate buffer for this pool location. Lastly, we discussed that there's a 200-year-old tree which would be potentially damaged if the pool came any closer to the middle of the property. So if I recall correctly, the board seemed to come to a point where the application was looking favorable upon moving this pool. So I'd like to run through the board, and I'll start with Mr. Fisher and see what he has to say.
Just before you start, we also had letter of support from the neighbor immediately to the rear of us who fronts on Montauk Avenue. And we're separated from them by those green giants as well.
So is that the fourth letter of support?
That was another letter that came in by email, I believe.
Okay. So
The letter.
An S, I forgot it. Give me a second, I'll get it on.
It's okay.
or we can start with Mr. Fisher, if you'd like a comment. Okay, Alex.
I wasn't part of the discussion on it.
Would you like to comment?
Well, I did have some concerns, and I sympathized with the builder, and the homeowner. And the concern I had was the amount of variance and the 7 feet. But there's the neighbors, and it seems like most of the homes in that neighborhood that do have pools have the same. I do appreciate they've made a commitment and made changes. And I still have some reservation, but if the neighbors and so forth are in favor, I would give consideration for a possible vote.
The neighbor on Montauk Avenue is Reiner, and they have a frame garage, detached frame garage that's 1.5 feet. The neighbor who we did not get a letter from is Mitchell to our east, and they have a part of their structures less than a foot from the street.
See, the concern I have, you have an area that just really doesn't accommodate a pool, and looking at the figures, I mean, they're 7 feet.
Well, it's accommodating a brick patio right now with lounge chairs.
Excuse me?
It's accommodating a brick patio with lounge chairs.
Yeah.
And it is extremely well screened on 3 sides. So you can't see into this backyard. That's the reason why I gave you the letter from the man across the street. You can't see, the Romanos, they also got pool variances years ago. You cannot see from his house into this backyard because of the vegetation that surrounds the property.
Dennis, just so I'm clear, are you arguing that because there's an existing patio there?
Yeah, we're taking the patio out and putting a small pool in.
And that's a grandfather, that patio, that's why you're essentially saying.
Actually, the patio got a variance years ago, part of it did. Be as close to the boundary lines as it is now.
The patio goes up to 7 feet within
The patio is larger than the pool. We made the pool small. It fit inside the patio. It's basically I call it a plunge pool as opposed to anything else.
I think to your point with the neighbors, we've got lot number 134 adjacent to it, or I should say the neighbor to the west and one to the south, who each have pools. The screening is such that the thickness would be the equivalent of another 6 to 7 feet of screening, and hypothetically speaking, that constitutes or is very close to being something in the code compliance of the 15 feet.
The screening on the west side is all ours. We own that. It sits up on top of a platform. There's a 3-foot stone wall, grass, and then the green giants sit on top of that grass. And of course, the houses are very, very close together in that area.
Yes.
Dennis, do you know, I have been there, but I didn't go this past week. What is I know there's a wall southwest.
There's actually 2 walls.
2 walls, right? So, and there's a grade change, correct?
Excuse me?
A grade change.
A grade change, yes. There's a 3-foot wall as you come in that walkway.
Right.
Go up 3 feet, there's a level, and that's where the patio is. And then on the west side, there's another 3-foot wall with the green giants on top.
Right. So between the neighbor and the pool is a drop of, you're saying 3 feet.
3 feet at least, yes.
In that corner.
And the same with the neighbor who's facing, who was on Montauk. There's a 3-foot wall separating them.
Right. This is one that's difficult for me because I just think there's a lot of stuff on this law already. I know you're taking this swap and something out. I guess with the grade change, that does help because it puts the pool, it's submerged. The 7 feet seems very close to the 30% of the setback. The grade change does help mitigate that somewhat. And I do understand there's a lot of streets that I have down there. You can't see into the backyard. But
Is there a precedent, Scott, for such a small setback? Such a large variance.
I suppose we've done variances this type before pools, it's a pool unusual. Dennis would probably know that.
Can't recollect, otherwise I would have put that in the application to give you something to go by. But there've been plenty of pools that have been built, and not necessarily pools, but accessory structures. All the accessory structures around the three lots that are around us, every one has an accessory structure right next to the boundary line, within a foot, under 2 feet. It's probably why the neighbors were getting letters, because it didn't affect them.
I'm going to ask the board if we want to give this more consideration, or if they're ready to vote on this, these recent changes. So, do you think, Mr. Fisher, the applicant has satisfied request in terms of minimizing the variance?
I think the applicant has taken steps. I'd be interested in the rest of the board's feelings about what more can be done.
Yes.
The thing that we've done is to make the pool smaller.
Val, so you're going to go for a vote now?
I'd like to see, what the board thinks rather than go to a vote with this, because it sounds as if there's potential, to minimize this request a little bit further, but it's not clear to me. So, Kim, what was your thought on this? Other than-
Well, we've kind of gone over this over and over, and we've asked them to compromise, they took out the patio. The underlying factor is that the neighbors are opposing it. I would give consideration of living on the table.
Shall we go to your vote?
Well, I'm curious, Mr. Chairman, where you,
So this application has been before this board 2 previous times. Although the 7 foot seems minimal, there are mitigating factors in terms of 2 letters of support. We have a degree of screening between the 2 properties, which also have pools, which constitute a distance of greater than 15 feet. So if this lot line were at the 15-foot mark, the applicant is demonstrating a minimum of 8, call it 6 to 8 feet of screening, and then 7 foot. So reduction has been made to the point where they're not exceeding
wall,
yes.
you're talking about noise disturbance.
Yes, and he has mitigating circumstances of 2, 3, 4 letters of support now we have. So I think that the uniqueness of this application is such that it's a difficult variance to set precedent.
That's one question.
Yes.
Concerned about civil principle.
It's a unique application where someone would have to have all of these mitigating circumstances, including a 200-year-old tree, which is being preserved. So I feel that taking 1 or 2 feet out of the pool serves no purpose, and I feel in favor of this application. Yeah. So we've stated enough to go through the 5 parts to demonstrate that 1, there's no undesirable change to the character of the neighborhood. 2, the application cannot be achieved by some other method. The applicant has gone through the steps to minimize the variances, and also this will not have an adverse effect on the physical environment or conditions in the neighborhood. Was the variance self-created? There was an existing patio there, which already received the variance in terms of its location. So people have it. I would say I'll leave it at that. There's enough here that we seem to meet the standards. So on that, I would ask would like to make a motion for attorney to, okay, we'll formally vote on that. Mr. Fisher.
Let me comment before we do.
Yes.
Just briefly, I just want to, again, for the record, say, well, one's a question, one's going. The comment is, it does seem as though one of the things they've done successfully is not increase the total lot coverage. They kept within the existing lot coverage, which I think is kind of the least that can be done in order to see the variance. And my question is, has the pool been reduced in size in this process?
Yes, we started out with a slightly wider pool.
Slightly wider, 15 by 18 or something?
Yeah, something to that effect. That was the original plan, but then it was reduced before it got to this board. I saw it was something that was, I thought was excessive. And I told the client that, and he agreed to reduce it to the size. I mean, the whole purpose here, just so I can say it, if we remove this tree, I could turn the pool in a different direction and I wouldn't need a variance. But they want to try to keep the tree. All the neighbors have asked the same thing. Please don't take down that tree. They all get shade from it.
All right. Okay, one yes.
It's based on my fellow board member wisdom.
It's 3 yeses. Mr. Baker.
I'll support it because of the tree and the fact that the pool to the lake.
Yes, I said I would support
Thank you. Can I please get a motion? Recommendation for this to go to our attorney for written decision.
So move.
All in favor? Thank you. Make a motion to close the public hearing on 36 Hamilton Street. And please get a motion to close the public hearing. So
I second.
all in favor? Item number 6, which we briefly discussed in the beginning of this meeting. Something that I just asked council, if this is something which the board should be discussing.
The board can discuss it if it wishes to go forward, but as I said previously, it makes some sense to adjourn it because you don't have a secret decision yet. Note that the moratorium doesn't prevent you from, it's the planning board from this board from going forward, but it would be sensible to adjourn it, but it would be on your motion, not the applicant's.
Based on the information which was brought before this board earlier this evening, can I please make a motion to adjourn the public hearing on this application until further notice?
Second.
All in favor? Item number 7, 70 Glover Street is to be adjourned. Can I please get a motion to adjourn the public hearing for 70 Glover Street?
I second.
All in favor? Item number 8 under old business is 23 Suffolk Street. And that is to be adjourned. Can I please motion to adjourn the public meeting on this matter? All in favor? Item number 9 is also adjourned. 29. Okay, so for the public, item number 9 is 68 Madison Street.
Let's say, don't skip us. How are you?
Good, thank you. You've been sworn in.
Yes.
before, Yes.
Yes, I just didn't have minutes on last time. Katrina Mercurio. You're welcome. They have the updated survey. Okay, so plenty of copies.
So, actually, I have the email version.
Okay, so since we were last here, we spoke about shortening the length of the pool to meet the shed. So now the pool is now an 8 by 32. By making the length shorter, it also decreased. We don't need the relief for the lot coverage because now it's at 25%, which is not over the max. It's actually right at it. So yeah, so if you guys have any questions, just let me know.
Dan Hampton. I can give a quick recap if you want.
Yes, please.
So I'm Cindy O'Hagan. I was sworn in last time. I'm the homeowner. So this is our third appearance before the board. Originally, we had asked for a pool that was 10 by 40 in our backyard. The backyard is actually quite large, but it's longer, right, than it is wide. Just as a reminder, both of our neighbors, we're sort of sandwiched in between our neighbor on Madison Street and our neighbor on Union Street, and both of them have pools. The neighbor on Madison Street, their pool is actually much closer to Madison Street than ours would be because we're in the middle. The neighbor on Union Street, their pool is much closer to Jefferson Street and also closer to Union Street than ours would be. The house is on a slope. You probably are familiar with it. It's on the corner of Union and Madison. You can't even see our backyard from the street. You wouldn't even know we have one. And again, given that both of our neighbors have pools and neither of them are objecting to us putting in a pool, we've owned the house for 20 years, never asked for a variance for anything. And also it's 20-year plus landscaping. It's very heavy coverage on all sides, both from our plantings and our neighbors' plantings, especially because they both have pools, so they've already done a lot of that. Again, the first time you asked us to go from 10 by 40 to 8 by 40, and then last time you asked us to go from 8 by 40 to 8 by 32, so that the pool would be in line with the shed. So we've now done that. So I just asked for your consideration.
Is anyone in the audience? No. To your point, we've asked you to reduce this pool several times, which you've successfully done. Also, the location of the pool to be in line with the neighboring shed, which is on the Madison Street side of this property. This shed acts as the buffer. The neighbor also has a pool, and opposite, but what's noted here on the survey is the Lowell property also has a pool. There's a structure, a garage, which creates more screening. And to your point, similar to another variance request this evening, there's a great deal of screening on this property. So there's merit to the changes which you have patiently come back with twice now. This is your third visit.
Yep.
So I feel that we can run through the board and just get a sense of what the board feels on this.
As I said last time, I'm familiar with the property around the corner. I have accomplished what we asked them to do. I guess they have
Again, that wasn't part of the original discussion, so I'm gonna listen to the rest of the board.
Okay. Scott.
I had to look at the street setback. Yeah. I do understand, and I think the shed is very important on that east side. That does help because it's very close to front. So yeah, I guess I'm over it. I guess we need to find a way to distinguish this because I want this to set precedent. The other one would be easier to distinguish because we're smaller. Maybe get factors. That's sort of where I know the shed does help.
And even with the reduction to 32 by 8, sorry, 32 by 8.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't know if you had time to go, but it's just a very narrow place.
It is now. No.
If I could just add something.
I just have difficulty also because the relief of the west side is 8.3 feet where 15 feet is required. And the other proposed side yard is 10, it's 15, and just looking at it, I just think that we're in the process of allowing these schools to come in and seems like we're almost precedence to every pool, so I had some reservation.
Scott, can I ask you again, was there a discussion about moving the proposed pool? Like I can imagine it going further north into the east. So it's more up against the
Suggested that, yeah, closer to the house to the sea line. It would have to be much smaller. That sounds like a project.
as much as.
No, I mean setback. Right. There really isn't another place to put it.
It's kind of like a flag lot.
Yeah, yes, and this is the boat, this is the
This
boat.
is the whole-
I didn't mean to interrupt the board's consideration. I just want to know if I could say one more thing. So it says Lowell on here because the original survey that we had when we bought 20 years ago, he used the same, but I'm sure as you guys know, the Lowells sold that property to the Friedrichs, and they undertook an enormous renovation of the landmark house, beautiful renovation, but it took years and they got many, many variances. The pool is bigger now than it was before. Their house is bigger now than it was before. It's encroaching on our property, but we never objected. And I think if you're looking for this not to set precedent, it's that we are sandwiched in between two yards that also have pools much bigger than ours. Certainly, the Friedrichs is much bigger, that you can't even see our place from the street. And our neighbors certainly are not going to be bothered by any noise because they have their own pools. So I think there are plenty of ways to distinguish it.
It's a 2-foot wide pool. No, kidding.
I won't speak for the board, but we have that comment that the reduction is quite small in terms of the setbacks are 7.7, but there is a 6-foot setback at the top of the pool. I believe that we've been requesting for this to reduce and reduce, and we've complied with that. But did you have support from the neighbor? The neighbor showed at the first meeting, and I can't recall.
Yes, we did. In fact, we supported him when they asked for their variance, whatever it was, 10, 15 years ago. And his name is Rob, Rob Smart, and his wife is Christine Smart. So he showed up and he does support it. If you want, I can get a letter from him. We submitted a letter on his behalf 15 years ago. The Friedrichs never asked us for one, so we didn't submit one, but we certainly didn't object to their renovations, even though we watched them quite closely.
Thank you.
Sure.
I've been to the property and with the screen, it's hard to tell because it relatively flat from parcel to parcel to parcel across the 3 parcels.
Yes, because the Smart's property on Madison is also on slope. Ours is probably higher, a little bit higher, but by the time you get to our backyard, it's pretty level. The Friedrichs, when they did their renovation, they put in giant, beautiful, but giant holly trees all along the side of our property. So that's very well.
No, I know it's very well.
Yeah. And then we put in green giants next to our patio to further the screening. Geometry.
The 6.1 foot setback is something which compared to the 15 required could be perceived as much of a request. Would you, speaking to Baker, thinking that the back and there's a consistent 7.7 feet of the length of it?
Not what, 2 to 4 feet off the pool,
Yeah.
back to 7.7.
May I ask, is the concern about the neighbors or about the precedent? Because Freeberg's are not there, right? They rent out their house.
The concern is more about precedent. People who might not exactly have the history behind this, that's just randomly say that there's a number which has been granted in terms of relief.
Right.
You have a unique situation, however, and I feel that you're very, very close to the point where my feeling is both Mr. Fisher and myself are leaning in favor of the application, where the other members are perhaps seeking a little bit more of a reduction. I feel that if that were to happen, where the 6.1 feet can be taken down to the 7.7, you have a unique condition where this pool is surrounded by structure. Their neighbors are in support, and you have quite a bit of screening on the western side of the property, which would mitigate any concern that we have a 7.7 foot setback. So if you're looking at the survey,
Yep.
the lot line, which abuts your house and the former Spalding Gray house, if the pool lines up with that, you could potentially minimize this variance request and get it down to 7.7.
Can I just ask if people think that might actually do the trick? Because the first time you guys didn't have a problem with the length, so we changed the width, and we came back, and then you had a problem with the length, and we said anything else, you said no. Now you're saying, I mean, just to be honest, I mean, and it's just, you know, every time we have to get a new survey, and have to pay for it, and we have to come back, and so I don't want to keep doing this if 2 or 3 of the board members think that no matter what we do, they're going to vote against it.
Fair enough.
That's a fair assessment. Okay. That being said, maybe we can run through the board and go for a vote on this.
Okay, that'd be great.
Okay. We'll start with Mr. Fisher. One in favor.
Don't listen to my compatriots on that.
Mr. Baker.
I think the variances are too large, and looking at the 6.1, 7.7, 15 feet there, most of them are almost over 50%, so I give them a
Mr. Baker.
I guess if we got rid of the 6.1 variance, figure out ways to distinguish this from other properties. I can. On it. I just don't know how we distinguish it. I don't know words to do that. I know the shed. There are lots of problems there.
I think what I would just add from I'm generally agreeing with Scott on this, I could be persuaded, especially 6.1 got bumped up to 7.7. For me, I would want to also know just kind of what the general precedent is for what's the minimum setbacks that this board has approved. Maximum variances to setbacks, if this board approved, just so we know the context in which we're making this decision, to what extent are we going beyond precedent that's already set. Obviously, there's been previous decisions that allow variances on that 15-foot setback, but to what degree, I'm not really familiar. I just want to know what we're doing relative to history.
Sure.
So I would like to consider this a little bit further.
I can get them. I
Is it
can get
anything
them.
for you? Yeah, not really.
Sure. No, I mean, it won't take me long. I can do it.
It sounds like perhaps I get another survey and reduce it and come back and what next time?
Well, you may, I mean, if you want to say money on surveys, you may want to hear what the board has to say after it's reviewed what the precedence is and whether, as Scott says, there's an opportunity to distinguish this property before you go ahead on a survey, because we wouldn't want you to go do the survey to get that 6.1 and 7.7, and then we conclude after doing some research that there's still no way to approve it under that.
Right. So, well, no, I definitely would prefer that, but it's just the time and it's mainly start this process that's January. And so I assume that means I come back, what are we in September? I come back in October and you tell me your decision, and then I have to get another survey and then come back in November, right?
Yeah, there's a list.
But I mean, I'm happy to defer.
When the board talks about precedents, it's, zoning, one of the basic precepts is properties are so very different, right? And then you try to apply a general zoning code to it, it creates a challenge, and that's why you're here, to be a relief valve. So precedence is an interesting thing in zoning. To really have precedence in the case, it has to meet the exact characteristics, which is very difficult in a case involving properties, which are all different shapes, sizes, the improvements located on it. Here, I think it's pretty clear the shape of the property and how it's set out. The existing improvements on it create a challenge, and basically the size of the structure that's being proposed. I'd also encourage you to look at the New York State balancing test, right? Obviously, there's a benefit to getting a pool. What's the detriment to the neighborhood? And really, when we apply the 5 prongs, 90% of area variance cases are impact to the character of the neighborhood. And how is this going to impact the character of the neighborhood? And really, the immediately adjacent properties. So that shed provides great screening. It's where you could say that the accessory structures are being located on these 2 lots in this area where they really mitigate impacts, especially to the eastern property. And then what's the impact of the western property? You take those 2 parts, take the balancing test, any detriment, and then impact to the character of the neighborhood. And that's in the way that you should view this type of area variance case. And precedent, again, it's got to be 4 square on what's happened before, because you can always distinguish. The board's done a terrific job so far of distinguishing this piece of property. You've identified that. There's also a series of cases in zoning law that says the zoning board can deny variance, but it's given the exact same variance before and said, we made a mistake, or we've given too many of these variances and it's starting to create a problem. So while we've done it before, we think it's a bad idea in this case. And those cases where that has happened have been upheld.
Thank you. And to Mr. Gilmartin's point, working at the five-prong standards which are applied to a variance, I can't see any detrimental impact on this additional 4 or 5 feet of pool, which we're asking you to remove in order to get to 7.7. However, the 6 foot number is something that feels other board members are expressed concern over. I personally, like Mr. Fisher, am in favor of your application, but I don't know if you'll get a vote from us.
Okay.
If the if we went to a vote, it appears that it would be
3-2
in favor and 3 not. However, if the 7.7 were consistent, not a 6 foot number, perhaps that would have an impact on how the other members might vote.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and get another survey and reduce that. So that the setback goes 7.7 instead of the 6.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So,
I assume you can't keep the length and the dimensions of the forest, move it south 2 feet or 2 feet.
No, because they already had us move it north.
Okay, gotcha.
Well, I think Mr. Matheson brings up a good point, because we have a pool which has been minimized to the point where, as a zoning board, we're doing our job, trying to see if there's a way to minimize the request. If the pool were to remain at this size, but to pull back, it would better the 6.1 foot setback. And there's no detriment in terms of necessarily exceeding that shed, the southern portion of your neighbor's shed, the one who approved or came in support of your project. So I personally feel that shift, perhaps with the northernmost portion of your pool to align with neighboring shed, would get you to the 7.7. And there's a unique circumstance behind this property as there was in the previous pool, which we approved this evening. And I feel it's moving in the right direction.
Okay.
So if we can adjourn based on minor survey.
So,
Change.
we're just shifting it
Yes.
to line the back, that
Yes.
back end. Okay.
Okay, so it no longer has to,
Yeah.
so we don't have to
You
actually,
keep the 32 by 8, just move it south enough so that 6.1 turns into 7.7.
okay,
Yes.
we can do that.
Okay.
Okay, no, I really appreciate it. I appreciate,
And that's not a guarantee, but that's the.
understood,
So
understood.
there's an abundance of screening here, which is quite unusual, to the point where this pool is not visible. You've got neighbors in support, and you've got solid structures which surround the pool. So as Mr. Gilmartin had mentioned, this is a unique application where it would be difficult for someone to repeat the request. So I think we're there, very, very close. And if we could adjourn until next month, so.
October 6th, 19th? I thought it was the 16th.
Mr. Gilmore, your points are well taken. Presented to us. Thank you.
Okay, so
I agree.
can
Thank you.
I please have a motion to adjourn?
So
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, and thank you for your patience.
Yeah, no, thank you for yours too, the consideration. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 9. According to Harding Terrace was actually changed in sequential order, but, sorry, 29 Harding Terrace will be adjourned. Can I please have a motion to adjourn the public hearing on 29 Harding Terrace until next month's meeting?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. We have Catton's vote.
I'm going to recuse myself.
Okay. For the record, Mr. Willoughby will recuse, he's a neighbor of the property. You have been here before, sir?
Yes,
Yes.
Zoom, not physically.
This is for the- Please go ahead.
Just to refresh the board's memory, 7 Cadmus, it's considered a 2-bedroom, I mean, a 2-story home in the village because the basement, given the slope of the property. Our C of Os with the basement, the bedrooms in the first floor are described as grossly non-compliant because there's no egress with it. And so our application is to add egresses to the bedrooms in the basement / first floor. And we're also adding a pool, and we want to extend a retaining wall that's currently at the front of the property, which is 35.5 feet from the street, the length of the pool. So we're also requesting a variance on the retaining wall.
The retaining walls are requirement in terms of the egress. If I'm correct with this, but the pool, I was not here for your first presentation. However, I am aware that you had repositioned the pool and also decreased the pool size.
Correct.
And I would defer to the board to provide comment on those changes.
We agree, reduce the size of the pool, made it so we're not requesting a variance for the pool itself. That's falling within the setbacks. So the request for the variances are for the retaining wall and egresses.
And the egress is required. I personally, as an architect, I know New York State fire code, you need a way to get out of your house. So I feel that, and it's something not technically considered a great structure, although our code calls it that. I'm generally good with that request. And as far as the retaining wall, that's necessity based on the contours of this property, it actually requires something to hold back the grade. So if I could run to the board for comment, I don't see anyone in the public here to speak on this. So
I just had one quick question. Did we end up getting a revised survey?
Oh, yeah.
I just, so later. Because our numbers not called out.
This is June 24th. Okay.
Survey.
I think that's brought up in the June,
What?
not having the survey.
The last project.
No, that's the most updated one.
So how did they get the numbers then?
Yeah. We have one that was from May
6, and then. Tell you what the-
My architect. Unfortunately, he's on a baby moon vacation. So.
This is one as well. It's a variance on the pool being in the front yard.
Yes.
This is incorrect. The front yard variance of the pool is
It's gone.
It's gone. That's off the table. So
Yeah, we got rid of that. I mean, they made a number of adjustments to, we're really just down to the retaining wall and the window. well.
exactly.
Right, so this isn't, so it's this dimension back to retaining. From here to there. And that number right here. And that's theoretically.
Yeah. So first, I'm going to say this as well.
Do we know what the precedent is for window lots? Thirty-five yards setback, right?
It's 2 front yards. It's the issue with the house.
And they project not very much of the ground.
No, the idea is to have them flush with the ground so they're not transparent from the
Virtually,
street.
it's, you know,
It's code required to actually window well needs that. Yeah, it's also fire safety. Yes, so.
The existing structure was built before these codes, so I have a C of O for the house, but it's not really safe.
That's very great. Are you concerned about flooding?
No, I think, I think with the grade of the house, and we'll put in like a sump well, we need to put a new septic system in as well, so we'll have.
Entering into the bottom window well?
Yeah. Thank you for that.
The topography is such that the window wells on the higher land, and it's dropping right down. I feel that we're ready to come to an approval on the project, but there's a technicality which we may have cleared up. Okay, so we have a survey which has dimensions on it, and that it's a legal document which is required as a condition of the approval.
and we can't, if the number isn't on the survey, we can't stipulate it.
Do we have another survey that shows the number?
So the building inspector must have scaled it. Because this is the survey that was written from the turn down.
But that was the previous. building.
No, this
No.
was him.
Current.
This was Chris.
You would think you could stipulate it, as long as a new survey is submitted.
Right.
Or
yes,
additional approval.
What's this, what's the step back?
Right here.
Approved for
And so close to-
It's 2016.
2016.
But do you have an engineer or surveyor that will stamp that number?
I can have that done, it's drawn with that intention. If we can get it like approved with the stipulation that the updated survey will say 26 feet from the front setback.
That's acceptable, so. I'm gonna make a motion, first I'll run through the board very quickly. Yeah, so if we agree upon this, the stipulation would be that the applicant is required to submit a survey which would indicate the dimensional request. And that document is something that would be stamped for your approval. So if the applicant comes to or drops off with the building department a survey with that dimension, we're good to go. Okay, yes. Two yeses, I vote yes.
Thank you all very much.
So I
Very
think we
welcome.
need to make a motion to draft a decision.
So, yes, I'm going to make a motion that we approve this project based on the stipulation that the applicant turn in a survey with the dimensions that correspond to the relief request being sought.
26 feet
26 feet
for each point of
to be exact. Can I please have a motion to approve this application with that stipulation? All in favor? Aye. Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you all very much. Appreciate that.
So you're gonna be on Thursday.
Yes, I'll be there on Thursday and I'll have a new survey plan.
All right, great. Thank
Okay,
you so much.
thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. Under new business, we have 19 Carver Street. Can I please have a motion to open may I please have a motion to open a public hearing on number 19 Carver Street?
I second.
All in favor?
Good evening, Tiffany Scarlato, 45 Division Street. Sag Harbor for the applicant. We do have another notice issue here, which I know Carrie is aware of. The public notice didn't appear in the paper and the notices didn't go out to the adjacent neighbors. Council had said it was okay to post the property, open the hearing, and we would adjourn the hearing to the October meeting while we cure the notice defect.
Okay.
You're back. Okay. I will post it over the minutes. This is an application for the demolition and construction of a new 2,136 square foot residence and accessory structures that meet all dimensional requirements but require sky plane relief for the residents in the amount of 1,926.43 cubic feet on a non-conforming lot consisting of 7,341 square feet with a road frontage dimension of 50 feet. The board fairly regularly issues variances in this regard because of the lot sizes. There'll be no undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood, nor the proposed change be detrimental to nearby properties. Most of the properties in this neighborhood, and I know the board has seen a lot of them on Carver Street and in that area, have been redeveloped in recent years to modern standards. And this residence is currently, as the board may be aware, is in quite a deteriorous condition and requires rehabilitation for habitability. The benefit to the applicant cannot be achieved by any other method other than the request for an area variance. The request is for a modest 1,926 cubic foot encroachment into the sky plane, which is a common variance issued by this board, particularly in circumstances where the lot is conforming as to lot size, particularly as it pertains to street width frontage, which makes it nearly impossible to construct a two-story residence on a lot that's 50 foot wide without relief from this board. Based on that, the variance requested is not substantial. The other thing I always talk about with respect to this is the village zoning code. I feel like I repeat myself constantly, but it's always an issue. The zoning code was built for half-acre lots, and we clearly don't have half-acre lots in the village, so we're always trying to squeeze everything we can onto a 50-foot wide lot, and applying zoning regulations as they currently exist, meant to be applicable to half-acre lots, to lots that are far undersized. Which is what creates the issue that we have here today, and creates an issue on a very regular basis on narrow lots, most of which are in the village. Very few lots in the village are actually conforming to zoning. I don't know if the board has any questions, but I think it's a fairly benign request. As I said, the proposed residence and its accessory structures all meet all other provisions of zoning with respect to lot coverage, setbacks, and the only relief that we're seeking from the board is sky plane.
Thank you. I would agree with your comments that the applicant has done a very good job in terms of designing this house to comply as best possible with the code. It's a modest dwelling. And, the dormers are the only period code infraction on the design. So I feel that we can go through the board and ask opinion and see what the feeling is about the request. So
I agree with all those comments, but when I look at it, I wonder how the neighbors felt.
Well, have not been noticed yet. We'll see that on the next hearing date. Obviously, the board's not going to make this decision this evening. But we'll be here back in October again.
Do you have any letters though?
Not any letters of support, no. We'll probably reach out to the neighbors between now and then and get some.
They seem to have the same problem.
They all do. If you recall, the board recalls there have been a number of properties that have come in front of this board, particularly on Carver Street, because all of the lots were very narrow when they were created there. Prior to the advent of modern zoning in the village. So you're running into that problem on a regular basis in that area of town.
Now, the thing that they had, stupid qualities so as to limit the ability of selling residents.
Comment, Mr. Baker? We were just looking at the two dormers, and I would prefer it if the play heights in the dormers could maybe reduce. They could take advantage of the cathedral ceiling, maybe reduce it to 7 or 7.5 to pyramid violation. And it could be that on the other side, and they're trying to make the equal, it could be on the other side of the staircases, that could be reduced more because you're sort of walking up to a lower point there. I don't know if there's taken. That's the only comment that I have, because I mean, we're pushing 2,000 cubic feet, which is still quite a lot.
Mr. Baker is referring to, this is staircase on the side of the structure. It is the right side elevation.
I'm happy to comment on that.
I do have the applicant here, the homeowner Andrew Tilbury is here, and he'll be able to address that issue. So I know he was very involved in the design.
You guys need to swear in or?
Yes, sir, I would have to swear, please.
Okay, how does that work?
Okay, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you, sir. Could you please state your name for the record?
Yeah, my name is Andrew Tilbury, the property owner.
Thank you.
So I did have this property studied by 3 different architects. We really attempted to do it without any intrusion into the sky plane. And I cut it back as much as possible. This is about if we cut it back anymore, I won't be able to have living areas and the living bedrooms in the upstairs with, I don't know how to describe it. The roof is going to really kind of come into the bedroom. So this is why we're putting in those dormers. And that's kind of what we came up with. I have spoken to 3 of the adjacent neighbors. I don't have letters from them yet, but they were all very supportive of it. As I talked them through it, I was planning on having those for the next meeting. Any other questions? I'm happy to.
It's just that the 1900 whatever cubic feet of pyramid violation is a lot.
Yeah.
And the sill height at the window on both the dormers could be reduced, but it still meet New York State code for habitable space.
Correct. I studied the cross sections of this staircase, and the height is such that if the dormer did come down lower, there's no impact on the stair in terms of clearance for headroom, more than ample. So from the landing, this is what you call switchback stair. It goes up in terms direction. And if that one dormer were to reduce, it would help reduce the request.
And then it wouldn't be.
No impact on living space.
Yeah.
Bedrooms.
I think that I would have to let the architect look at that. I'm not an architect for that question.
Yeah, it does work well in terms of headroom, even with a slight reduction to the dormer on the cross section. It's obvious.
I think my preference would be to look at the house as it's currently designed and gone through so many iterations of it.
Okay. All right. Well, we have yet to hear from a neighbor. So thank you for the introduction. Maybe we'll run through other members to see anyone else have comments, please.
I do. On that particular street, there have been a number of homes that have been built which are much larger and higher than your house. I think you've done an admirable job. And I would be concerned about what your neighbors might think. They were, I think it'd be very important to get their opinion if they have any negative or positive.
Absolutely. So can I just ask a question? Would that be the adjacent neighbors or others on the street as well?
Well, you have adjacent and then going up towards Lighthouse Lane, you have one that's just been built. And these are really large homes. You're confined to the area that you have. But I think that the direction is very admirable. I think it's consistent without changing to some extent the character, because some of those homes there have changed the character of the neighborhood.
Thank you.
I would just generally say, I agree. I think you've done a nice job of staying within the lot and building coverage limits, which is appreciated. And it seems to me that this is pretty straightforward with pretty modest modification of the dormers. You can pretty much have the house you want, so I don't think it's a big change. You could get all the functionality you want. So we're architect about that, but on the whole, awful.
For the board's edification, I usually put my clients through pretty much what the board would put them through prior to submitting an application. So we have gone through a number of iterations, and I do that pretty often. So it feels pretty beat up at this point, for sure. But we'll definitely take that back to the architect, and we'll be back next month.
Right. In particular, just the one dormer on the right-hand side is where, if the architect had studied that, there appears to be more potential to minimize the request. All right, well, thank you for the introduction, and I would like to please ask for a motion to adjourn this matter until next month.
Yes, what's the date on that?
October 19th.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great night.
Thank you. Yeah. Under new business, number 39 Suffolk Street is to be adjourned. Can I please have a motion to adjourn the public?
No. It's a public hearing, but, you know,
Oh, we don't have
jurisdiction.
So. Suffolk Street, can I please have a motion to open the public hearing for this matter?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Just say one thing. They didn't close. So they need to do that.
Well, it has to be re-noticed anyway.
So they just make sure.
They have to renotice and repost.
Yeah, it will go on.
So based on the applicant not posting, you will have to renotice. May I please have a motion to adjourn the public hearing on 39 Suffolk Street?
So moved.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Decisions, we have a decision for 41 Main Street. Can I please have a motion for our village attorney to read the written decision? All in favor?
Want me to read the whole thing or just somewhere?
Somewhere else, please.
A yes vote to this determination, to grant variances to allow an office to be constructed on the first floor of the property at 41 Main Street. We will also grant a parking waiver of 3 parking spaces.
Thank you. Can I please have a motion to approve the written decision? 41 Main Street.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Written decision number 2 is for 29 Henry Street. Can I please have a motion for our village attorney to read the written decision? Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
A yes vote to this determination will grant variances to the pyramid or sky plane wall to allow the construction of the first and second floor addition to the premises at 29 Orange.
Thank you. May I please have a motion to approve the written decision as read?